In this video, I'm going to show how to use the Polycam app to scan objects and then process them for use in Unreal or Unity. So you can run Polycam on the new iOS devices, the iPad Pro 11 and the iPhone 12, and it has a lidar scanner which scans objects very quickly. This scene in Unreal is made using some of the content packs on the Unreal Asset Store, the Brushify pack, and the Australia photogrammetry scans. So this is all content you can buy on the Asset Store. The project I'm working on requires photorealistic assets, and so I've started using Polycam to scan rocks to add to this scene, so I'll show you some of those. So this is a high-resolution photogrammetry scan of a log, and this is a Polycam scan of a granite rock. So this is made not using photogrammetry, but very quickly using the iPad's lidar scanner. So what's the difference? The difference is the Polycam scans take 30 seconds. You walk around the object, pointing your phone or your iPad at it, it records a quick video, it processes it, and when you hit export, it emails you the OBJ file. It's almost instantaneous. The photogrammetry scans take many hours. You have to take hundreds of photographs, and then you have to process them in a photogrammetry app, which can take up to 10 hours for a high-res object. And you get a very high-resolution mesh. So photogrammetry scans can be 10 million triangles, whereas these Polycam objects are about 200,000 triangles. Although these ones that you see here in Unreal are 5,000 triangles at the closest level of detail, and they drop down to just 100 triangles when you get further back. So I'm going to show how to process the files in Blender to get them ready for use in Unreal or Unity. I'll show Unity as well. Now, the first thing you've got to consider when you're scanning objects is the lighting. You don't want them to be in bright, direct sunlight. So try to scan objects that are in the shade, or try to scan objects on an overcast, cloudy day with even lighting. So this photo here is an example of a bad lighting scenario, because obviously one side of the rock is much brighter because of direct sunlight. On the other side of the same hill in the shade were these rocks, which are ideal for scanning because the light is very diffuse and even. There's no direct sunlight on the rocks. These are perfect for scanning because you want to bring these into a game engine with dynamic lighting that could be from any direction. So it's no good if your scans have got fixed shadows in them. Here's another good example. This rock has got direct sunlight on it from one side, so this is no good for scanning. You can't put this in a game and relight it from a different angle, unless you spend a lot of time in Photoshop correcting for this lighting. Here's the same rock 30 minutes later, after the sun had set just below the tree line. So it wasn't dark yet, but the sun was no longer shining directly on this. So you can see at this point, it's perfect for scanning. So how do you scan? You actually hold up the iPad and walk around the object. You hit record in Polycam and walk around the object just like this. The blue areas are mesh that it hasn't scanned yet, so you have to keep walking around until there's no more blue triangles to scan the entire thing. After you've completed a scan, it will show you a preview like this. So I will select HD for high definition. This gives you 4K textures, and you click process. And that will then bake the video textures onto the mesh. Then you click this icon here to crop and narrow the green box in onto the mesh that you want. When you hit crop, you get a smaller mesh, just the focused area that you're interested in. And then you hit the export button and export it. Now here's an example of a mesh with a hole in it. So in this case, I scanned this rock. When I looked at the preview, there was a little hole in it because there were some plants in the way. Sometimes that can happen. You can click this plus here to rescan an object, and it will add the new data to the previous scan. When you're ready to export it, select the model you want to export, hit this button here. I'm using export to OBJ. That's best for bringing it into game engines. If you want to just quickly show somebody else what the mesh looks like, you can upload it directly to Sketchfab. This uploads the original high-res mesh with the bad textures though, so you wouldn't want to use this model in-game. You need to pay for this, so the free version does not export OBJ. You can buy a license, a perpetual license for $80, or you can subscribe I think the annual subscription is $30 a year. All right, I've scanned a whole load of objects and I've emailed them from the iPad to my computer. Let's take a look at what you actually get. So you get an MTL file, which is the material, an OBJ file, which is the mesh, and you get some JPEG textures. Now the UV maps are pretty terrible. The video is split into chunks mapped onto the objects, and then when you go back to recapture any of the small areas you missed, it recreates new tiny textures. So we'll need to remake the UV maps for this to be a bit more efficient. On larger objects, you can get more than one image map. If you've exported on the HD settings, your images will be 4K resolution. Although it sometimes makes smaller textures too. Yeah, here's an example where there's a 4K main texture, and then as I walked around this and scanned it again, it created some new smaller textures to fill in the gaps that it discovered on the second pass. So let's import one into Blender. I'll import OBJ. There's the OBJ file. Now you may find it's off-centered from the origin. So the first thing I like to do is recenter it. So I go Object, Set Origin, Geometry to Origin to put it back on the origin. And in fact, I'll probably just put it a little bit below the origin so that when I drag it into a game engine, it will be slightly buried under the ground. So there we are. And just click on Material Preview to see the texture. So the OBJ is linked to the material. It's already connected. If you go to the Materials tab, you'll see its material there. And some scans, very large objects, will have more than one material. So it generally uses one material for each texture. So you can see it's already connected the material here. You can also find sometimes that your scans have holes in them, which you would need to correct. I'll open another one to show you what that looks like. This large rock, I think, has a hole in it. Yeah, if your object is surrounded by grass, then grass can mess up the lidar scanner. So you can see here there's some holes in this rock where there are weeds and grass. So you would need to fix those. Just fill them in with some polygons before you proceed. So you could just select the open loop and fill. And don't worry about the texture. You can paint in the missing texture later on if you need to. So that's how I would patch up the holes if your rock has holes in it. I'll work on a smaller one here that I can finish quickly for this video. So this is a nice one to work with. So let's rename this the high res. So I'll call this Sandy Rock High, and then I'm going to duplicate this for the low resolution. So the process is going to be duplicate this original mesh. The original mesh is 37,000 triangles, which would be okay on a current generation console. But I'd like to make this very efficient. I want this to be a very fast scene. I want it to work in VR. I want it to work with very long draw distance. So I'm going to optimize these down to about, well, for my large rocks, I do 5,000 triangles. For something this size, I'll probably do about 3,000 triangles. And that'll be for the first level of detail. I'll do level of detail 1 and 2 as well, which will be about 1,000 triangles and maybe a few hundred. So let's just duplicate this. We'll call this one Plot 0. So that's level of detail 0, which is the highest level of detail that I'll use in the game engine. And the first thing I'll do is delete all the polygons I don't need. So I'm going to select the sand around the edge. Okay, delete those, and then delete this outer part. So now I have just the rock. Let's decimate this down to the required polygon count. So I'll go to Modifiers, Decimate. Now we're at 21,000 faces now, so let's try 0.2. That gives me 4,000 4,000 faces, 4,000 triangles. In this case, all the faces are triangles. Let's go a little lower to try and get around 3,000. Let's try 0.15. That's 3,200. And that looks pretty good. There's detail where it needs it here, for sharp edges here and here. But there's no unnecessary detail. And of course, from back here, it still looks exactly the same. So if we just compare, there's the original high-res mesh, and here's the decimated version. They look basically the same. So I'll apply the decimate, and then I'll fix up any bad polygons. So I'll just go to solid mode, turn on the wireframe, and look for some bad polygons. You'll often find some bad polygons happen when you do a decimate. So this is very spiky. I don't like this. I'm going to just merge these out. It doesn't matter if the geometry doesn't match the high-res mesh exactly. We're just going to bake the diffuse texture from it, not the normals. Now here's some very bad topology here. Look at this. So the lidar's got very confused here. I'm just going to merge all these at center. And then bring this out, merge this one here. Okay, that's better. Here's another bad pole here. Okay, that's better. So I'll zoom out and look around the whole mesh for any ugly polygons or very sharp points or vertices that are too close to each other and aren't really adding much detail. I'm using merge to last here to just merge the vertex to the last selection. And I'm going to clean up the whole outside. So the idea with this mesh is that you'll only see the parts that are sticking out of the ground. The edges will be buried under the ground, so you're never going to see those. So I may as well reduce a lot of the detail here. I may as well take these big groups of vertices and just merge them at center like this. All right, that looks like it's done. So I'll just do one more check of the topology. There's still a few flaws. This area is interesting. I wonder, is it actually detailed here? Oh, there is. There's a crevice here that's worth retaining. So it's worth retaining these extra vertices here. So I'll leave those. There's bad lighting there, I see here. So I'll just fix that. Hitting the F key to focus on the selection. There's more bad lighting there because of that point. Okay, let's take a look at it on smooth shading. I see a flaw there. The vertex tucked underneath there. I'm just using X-ray mode to see through the mesh to select that. All right, I think that's good enough. So the next stage is to UV map this to improve the UVs. Let's take a look at the UVs on the original rock. So if I go to UV editing, select all the faces, you'll see it's terrible. The UV map is really bad because it's just trying to quickly map it from the video as you walk around. It's not making any effort to lay out the UVs afterwards. And in fact, most of this 4K texture is wasted. It hasn't used it at all. So you can see there's also a lot of stretching. This is highlighting the stretching with the colors. So what I'm going to do is remap the low polygon rock with very good UVs and then render the texture from the scan to the low polygon rock. So let's go to the low polygon rock, and I'll just define some edges. So to me it looks like there's 3 main planes to this. I'd like to try to have as little distortion as possible. So I'm going to split the mesh roughly into something like this. Roughly a big piece here, which will be mapped. Perhaps this area here, and then all the rest. I'll do that by selecting edges and marking them as seams. So I'm in edge mode now, and I'm just going to walk along the mesh, along the crest of the rock here, to define a seam. So I'll right click and do mark seam, and when I UV map this, it will split this section into a single UV shell with very little distortion. So you've got to go all the way to the edge, mark seam. Okay, so I have one seam there, and I'll do another seam over here, I think. And the idea is to create an area that is roughly planar, so that when it's mapped, there will be minimal distortion. Mark that as a seam. Okay, so we've now got this big piece and these 2 little pieces here. So let's see what sort of a result we get. I'll go to the UV editor. Now, of course, this is still using the material from the original. I want to get rid of this material. So let's go to the materials, trash that. Let's create a new material called baked diffuse. And let's create a new texture for this. We'll make it 2048. Don't need an alpha channel. Let's fill it with the UV grid so that it looks nice. And we'll put that on this object. So let's plug that into the color. What did I call this? Let's call this new texture, new diffuse. Okay, let's plug that in here. And as you can see, it's currently got the old UVs, which are horrible, lots and lots of different islands, and it's even got lots of different orientations, and the scaling's not the same. So I'll select all the faces and go UV Unwrap. Now let's take a look. So now you can see the scale of the UVs is very even. All the squares are the same size. There's only 3 shells, so there's very few seams. And there's almost no distortion. The squares are all square. We don't have diamonds or stretched out squares. Now the use of the UV page is not very good. We could fit these a lot better. So let's just do this again with some padding. So let me go UV Unwrap. And in here we can give it a bit of a margin. So it's got some padding. And I think I can do a better job of fitting these. So let's scale these up. And then reposition them. I think I can fit them all at this scale. Let's see. Okay, not quite. Maybe if I flip this around. Okay, I've made them a little too big to fit this scale, so let's scale it down again. I'm selecting one UV and I'm using the right angle bracket to just expand the selection to the full UV shell here. It's a nice shortcut. So I'd like this to fit on the side. It does fit. Okay, that's good. And then this one can go on the top. All right, I could possibly scale this up a little and still fit it. So let's see. I want to uniformly scale rather than stretch it. All right, that's probably as good as I can make this fit. So that will do. Now I want to render the texture into this new UV space. All right, I'll need a shader window so that I can see the texture that I'm baking into. So let's open up the shader editor. Select this guy, and you see it's got the new diffuse texture here. That's the texture that I want to render on top of. I want to overwrite that with the correct photograph texture. Now we need to turn the high poly rock back on. So what I want to do now is go to the render tab, make sure my render is on cycles, and we're going to bake the diffuse map, the colors, in other words, from the good rock, or rather the high-res rock, to the lot 0 with the good UVs. So let's look at the settings for cycles to do a bake. You need to open this bake tab. We want to bake just the diffuse texture. We don't want normals or anything like that. Actually, I'll talk about normal maps. So often you'll bake the normals from a high-res mesh to generate a normal map, but these Polycam scans aren't high resolution enough to generate a normal map from there. They don't have super high-res details in them. You'd need to sculpt cracks and things to get a normal map out of this. So instead, I'm going to use a trick to create a pseudo normal map from the diffuse texture. So we're not going to render the normal map here out of Blender. We're just going to render the diffuse. So I go down here to diffuse. I don't want any lighting. I just want the color as it is. So there's going to be no lights in the scene or any shadows or anything like that. I'm going to render selected to active. So that means take the high res and render it to the low res. And I'll just have a cage of 10 centimeters. The cage means project the rays 10 centimeters out to look for the high-res geometry. That should be plenty. And the output is going to overwrite this texture. So I select this, then I hold Shift and select that one, the high one. Make sure they're both visible, and then click Bake. And it then renders the texture. All right, it takes a few seconds to render. Now if I turn off the high-res rock, we can see the low-res one again. Let's get rid of these windows. And now let's check the UVs. So now you see I've got the texture from the high quality scan reprojected into my good UV space. And notice that I've left a little bit of space between the islands, and that's because I'm going to need that space to get a good normal map. I'm going to blur the texture a little bit or smear it over the UV boundaries to get a good normal map. So I recommend you leave at least 10 or 20 pixels in between the UV islands if you want to bake a normal map. So let's save this texture. I'll put it in the same place as the, let's see, this one is the sandy rock. So I'll put it in this folder. Let's call this sandy rock diffuse. And it'll be a PNG with no alpha channel. Now I'm ready to make the other LODs. So this rock is 3,000 tries, well 2,900. So let's make a LOD 1. So duplicate this, call this LOD 1, and put a decimate on it. Let's go to 0.25. We're now at 700 triangles, so that's fine. So I'm going to apply this modifier, and then I'll duplicate the original again. I'll call this LOD 2, and decimate this one. Let's go 0.05, and that gives me 146 triangles. So that's very low. That's good. I still think it's going to look fine from a distance. Let's just compare. If I zoom out and turn the previous LOD on, it's fine. So even though it's it's only 100 triangles, it's good enough to be viewed from far away. So let's apply that. And now I'll export each of these as an FBX. Again, I'll put it in the same folder. So this will be Sandy Rock Lot 0. Now, you got to get the right FBX settings for it to show up correctly. So first thing is we want to do limited to selected objects, so we don't export the whole scene. We don't want the animation. In the geometry, if you're exporting to Unity, normals only will work, but if you're exporting to Unreal and you want to keep the hard and soft edges, you need to set this to face or edge. So I'll set this to face. This will soften the whole object so it will have no hard edges. Apply modifiers, it's good to keep that on in case you've left a decimate or something else, but I've applied all my modifiers already. So export, then we'll do Lot 1. And it retains the settings. And Lot 2. Export. Okay, let's bring this into Unreal, see how it looks. So here's my scene in Unreal. Here's my 3 LODs. Let's bring in LOD 0. We're going to import this not as a skeletal mesh, but just as a static prop. I think I'll just leave all the defaults and hit import. All right, it should be at the right scale. Polycam scans at real world scale. So there it is. Now I need to make the material for it. So let me show you the material I'm using. It has a base color, diffuse, a normal map, and then the ambient occlusion, roughness, and metallic are all compressed into a single texture into the RGB channels of an image. And I've got some parameters for controlling the normals and specular and things like that. So we need to make up these images. We need this normal map, and we need occlusion and roughness. The rocks are not metal, so the metallic channel will be black. So I'm going to use the Materialize tool to generate these textures. Materialize is a free program from Bounding Box Software. It doesn't look very good on 4K screen, so unfortunately on a 4K screen the UI is tiny. It doesn't have UI scaling, so I'll enlarge this in the playback so you can see what I'm doing up here. The idea behind it is you can bring in a diffuse map and it will automatically generate height, normals, ambient occlusion, metallic, and all the other PBR textures that you need. So they're not as good as rendering it from a real high-res mesh, but they're good enough. They create interesting bumps and specular details that make your rocks look convincing. The first thing is you have to import a diffuse map. So I'm going to click O to open it, and then you have to find your texture. So let's see. Now first I'm going to show you the problem with the normal maps, and then I'm going to show you how to fix it, because it's easier to visualize it if I show you it done wrong. So Materialize is very good at generating height and normals from textures, but it's really optimized for seamlessly tiling textures. Because this is not a seamlessly tiling texture, because it's got black in between the islands, it's going to misinterpret the height map and consider those to be low. So when I create the height map, the black areas will be considered low, and then when I generate the normal map from that, you'll find that it makes each of the islands kind of bump up above the ground. So this would not look good. If I was to export this normal map into Unreal, we would see seams. We'd see edges in between the UV shells where the normals don't correspond. It would look bad. It would basically look a little bit like hard edges. So I'm going to show you how I fix this by smearing the diffuse map. So I'll go to Photoshop, and we'll take the diffuse map that we rendered out of Blender, and I'm going to smear it so that the colors extend out beyond the UV boundaries, so that the normal map's transition gets pushed further away from the UV shells. I'll show you. So I select the black and then invert the selection and copy and paste this. So now I have the rocks on a layer on their own. Actually, I should move my camera over so you can see the layers, or I'll just move the layers menu actually. So now you can see the layers tab there. So I have the rock isolated on its own layer. I'll fill the black background with 50% gray. So this is a good start because this, instead of the background of the normal map being low, it will be average. And then the next thing I want to do is clone this layer and smear this one. Smear the one that's underneath. So what I mean by smear is the smudge tool actually. So go to the smudge tool in Photoshop and smudge this out. So I'm smudging this layer outwards, and I have the original crisp layer on top like this so that it doesn't get deformed too much. And what's the point of this? This fixes this issue in Materialize where the normal map makes the islands raise up above the black background. So let's just do this all the way around. And this is why I've left such a large gap between the UV shells so that I have space to smear this a little bit. There may be a filter you can use to automate this. Blur doesn't work very well. Blur isn't as good as smearing it manually. If you know of a better way to do this, please let me know, because this is a bit tedious. The texture here is not very good. I've just noticed it's unrealistic. If I wanted this to be very high quality, I would probably fix that. I might just fix that now to make that look a bit better. Yeah, here too, there's a flaw. The render hasn't created very realistic textures in those two regions, so I'm going to try to fix that. So let's see, what would be a good way to fix this? Maybe I'll try the healing brush, so let's see. Or copy and pasting from another area might be good too. So this just doesn't look very good at all. I'll try taking some of this region and copy and paste. See if this will work. So I've made a layer mask. Just blur the edge a little. That's better. And there's a flaw here too. So let's just take some of this. Oh, I'm on the wrong lasso tool here. Let me get the normal lasso tool. Copy and paste. Oh, I've copied from the wrong layer, so copy from this layer. Put it over this bad area. And then mask the edge. All right, so there's the fix. Good enough. Now I'm going to use this texture in Materialize to generate the normal map to get a better result. So let's save this. So this is Sandy Rock Diffuse. I'll call this blurred. Save it as PNG. And let's use this in Materialize. Got two Materializes open. Okay, let's trash these. Clear that. Let's open the blurred version. All right, generate the height map. Now generate the normal map. Now you see the difference? It no longer has the extreme height changes at the edge, but also any flaws in the normals are pushed outside the boundary of the UV shell, so you won't see them on the mesh. Let's generate the ambient occlusion. Okay. Keep that. And a smoothness map. Now let's preview that. Okay, so here's what we've got. Now, this is exaggerating the height difference. It's actually doing a displacement here, which we won't do in Unreal. I'm just going to use normals, but this gives you a good idea that the normals are going to work quite well. Okay, now I'll save the textures and then combine them into a format suitable for Unreal. So I only need the normal, the smoothness, and the AO. We're not going to use the height map. You could if you had a displacement in your shader, but I'm not using that in this shader. So that little S button there is save. Oh, I want to make sure I'm saving as PNG, not bitmap. Okay, PNGs. Let's get the smoothness. And the ambient occlusion. Okay, there they are. There's the AO, there's the smoothness, and there's the normals. Now, remember, Unreal wants the occlusion and roughness in one image, so let's rebuild that. Let's make a new image, 2048. Bring in the smoothness and the AO. So the ambient occlusion goes in the red channel. Copy that, paste it into red. Now, Unreal uses roughness and Materialize generates smoothness. They're just the opposite. So to flip a smoothness map into a roughness map, you just invert it, Control I. Copy that, paste it into the green channel. I find it looks better if the rock has a bit more contrast between the rough and smooth. So I like to just adjust the levels on the roughness map just to bring some smoothness back in, so you get some specular highlights on the rocks. If it's rough everywhere, you don't get any interesting variety, so I think that would be nicer. Now this rock is not metal, so the metallic channel is black. If you're making a gun or a prop that has metallic parts in it, then you can use Materialize to generate the metalness map, or you can just paint it manually. So the end result should look like this weird yellow-green kind of an image. We'll save this as the sandy rock. This is occlusion roughness metallic, or okay, now we're ready to build the material in Unreal. So I'll duplicate an existing material. I just stick MI on the end as a suffix for material instance. Let's put the textures in here. I've got a textures folder, so I want the diffuse, the normal, and the occlusion roughness metallic. Unreal will recognize that the word normal is in one of those maps and set it up as a normal map, so that's fine. Let's now configure this material. So the texture is the sandy rock diffuse, normal map, sandy rock normal, and sandy rock aura is there. Looks good, save that. Now we'll put this on the LOD 0 of the mesh, so let's go back to here. Let's just take the word LOD 0 off the end. Let's just call this the sandy rock. Open it up and put the correct material on it. Okay, that's good. And you can see it has a little bit of specularity in this area. So that's good. Now I want LODs, the levels of detail, so that when I zoom out, we get lower resolution. And that's done here. You go LOD import, import LOD level 1, and find your FBX. So I want LOD 1 there. And then I'm going to import LOD 2. Open. Now I find that Unreal's default LOD rendering settings jump too soon, and I can see the change. So LOD 0 is when you're extremely close. And I can see the transition between the LODs. So I prefer to change the settings. So I'm going to go to auto compute LOD distances here and turn that off. And then for LOD 1, I'm going to set it to maybe 0.4. Let's see. It tells you the size over here. When you go to LOD auto, it tells you which LOD it's drawing, and the current screen size is 0.59. So if I scale back to 0.4, it'll switch. Oh, let's set the other LOD first. Let's go to LOD 2, and we'll set that to 0.1. So when the screen size is 0.1, we'll render LOD 2. When it's 0.4, we'll render LOD 1. And if it's any closer than that, we'll render the original mesh, LOD 0. And you can watch the transitions over here. So as you zoom in and out, just drag the left mouse button. So there's LOD 0 when it's reasonably close. As I go back, there, that has changed to 1. So that's the transition. And so you just want to look that there's no pop. If there's a visual pop, you're too close. Let's go back and trigger LOD 2. And it triggers way back here. And again, now I'm flicking between LOD 1 and 2 here, and you can't see the pop. So that means it's good. So every time you're back this far looking at the rock, you're looking at 170 triangles. It's very low, so it's very fast. That's it. That's ready to use. So let's save that. Okay, I'll place a few in the scene to check what it looks like. Okay, that corner there was where the bad material or the bad texture was, and I think it's okay now. No, it's not. It's not, because it's still using the original diffuse texture, not the one that I fixed. So let's change it. Okay. Textures, setting diffuse blurred. Save that. And there's the corner that had no texture or a bad texture, and the little copy and paste in Photoshop has done a reasonable job of fixing that. Let's just check the normals by spinning the light around. So it's pretty good. I'm seeing some detail on the surface of the rock here as the light moves around. It's pretty good, especially in this area here. So the normal map is working. Yeah, you can see it there. All right, let's look at setting it up in Unity. Okay, I have an empty scene in Unity. I'll just add a plane so that we can see the ground. Let's make sure that's on the Argent. All right, now Unity can detect the LODs in an FBX file. If you export your meshes as a single FBX and you name them LOD 0, 1, and 2 on the end of the name like this. So if I do file export FBX, and again, I've got selected objects, but this time I have all 3 LODs selected. So I'm going to export this as Sandy Rock FBX. So now this FBX file has all 3 LODs in it, and Unity will detect that and automatically create a LOD group for you. So let's just drag it in. Let's drag in this FBX in here. And you'll see now if I put this in the scene, you see it says LOD 0, and if I zoom out, it switches to LOD 1 and LOD 2. And you can configure the distances that the LODs change by just sliding this back and forward. So slide it to a point where you don't see the pop, and you're good. If you deselect it, it turns off that whole LOD interface. So I'll just turn down the light a little bit. The light's a bit intense. It's very hard to see. Okay. Now let's set up the material for this. So I'll use Unity Standard Shader. Let's create a material. Now, the way Unity requests its textures is a bit different. The albedo is the diffuse, and you see here it says RGB and transparency in the alpha. We don't need transparency. This is a metallic smooth PBR lighting system, so it wants a RGB color, rather a texture with the metallic in the R channel, and the smoothness in the alpha channel. Remember, smoothness is roughness inverted. So let's make that texture in Photoshop. So I'll make a new 2048, sorry. So the red channel is going to be the metallic, which is black, and the alpha channel. So we need to create a new channel here. Alpha 1 is going to be the smoothness, which is the same as Unreal's roughness, but inverted. So let's copy this one, paste it into the alpha channel, and invert it. So that's a smoothness map. And we'll save this as Sandy Rock Metal Smooth. So this is the Unity version, and this needs an alpha channel. I have a plugin for Photoshop that lets me save PNGs with an alpha channel. If you don't have this, then you should use a Targa. The Targa format also lets you save the alpha channel. Okay, and 32 bits keeps the alpha. Okay, let's put the textures in Unity. So I have a textures folder. So we need the diffuse, blurred one is the good one. We need the normal, and we need metal smooth for Unity. Okay, let's connect them to the material. So the albedo is going to be diffuse. Let's put this material straight on the rock so we can see it. Now, metal smoothness is this one, metal smooth. And the normal, now did it actually import this as a normal map? No. So I need to make sure that it imports this as a normal map. So texture type is normal map. Now that it's a normal map, I can put it on the material here. Normal. That's it. That's the process for Unity. Oh, now here's a problem. When I zoom out, the second lot doesn't have the right material. So let's check that it's actually assigned to all of these. And it's not. So you see there, this has kept the material from the FBX. So let's just drag that onto that LOD and also onto that one. And that's fixed it. Okay. So now that I have the correct material set up on each of these, I'll make this a prefab. We'll just bring this out here. Do you want to create a new original prefab or a variant? Let's make a new original, and we'll call this Sandy Rock Prefab. And so this one, if I place it in the scene, will have all the correct materials already assigned. Now I want to spin the light and see how it looks. Let's check that the normals and the specular is actually working. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, so I can see a little specular highlight there. And the light's moving nicely. Okay, I hope this was useful. If you know any better ways to generate the normal maps for Polycam Scan, please leave a comment and let me know. Thanks for watching.